Hello and welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we are going to be focusing on a few of the foreign policies of President George H.W. Bush. So, the first George Bush to become president. Our particular focus will be on the fall of the Soviet Union as well as the Persian Gulf War. So, let's go ahead and get started. In 1988, Vice President George H.W. Bush was elected president. He carried 40 states, giving him 426 electoral college votes to 112 votes that Michael Dukakis had for the Democratic Party. So he won in a very decisive victory. However, Bush's victory did not extend to Congress. The Democrats retained or held onto control of the House and the Senate. So, George H.W. Bush is now president, but the Democrats still control the Congress, House of the Representatives, and the Senate. And Bush's presidency was during a time of sweeping change in world affairs. The Soviet leader Gorbachev wanted to end the arms race of the buildup of nuclear weapons between the two countries so he could focus on reforms within his country. In 1990, Gorbachev and President Bush achieved a breakthrough with the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the START Treaty. For the first time, two nuclear powers agreed to destroy existing nuclear weapons. Most Soviet citizens were more concerned about their own problems than arm control. So Gorbachev's policies aimed to solve economic problems, even though changes were coming slowly. Very focused Gorbachev was on economic problems, getting the country back on track, eliminating food shortages and basic items such as shoes and soap because of the government mismanagement and heavy defense spending. So again, Gorbachev, who's pictured right here, his goal is to kind of reform his country and help out the people of the Soviet Union. So, with reforms underway in the Soviet Union, the peoples of Eastern Europe felt free to demand change in their own countries. These were countries that were most likely controlled by the Soviet Union. In Poland, shipyard workers won the right to form an independent labor union called Solidarity in August 1980. Elsewhere in Eastern Europe, demonstrators filled the streets of major cities, and as public pressure increased and Soviet controls relaxed, long-sealed nation borders were opened and communist governments toppled. In late 1989, the Iron Curtain that had divided Eastern and Western Europe, again, that fictional line that divided Eastern and Western Europe, began to crumble. During this time, Gorbachev encouraged reform, encouraged the betterment of society for the individual. Freedom also came to East Germany, with protests raging and thousands of citizens fleeing to the west. The communist government opened the Berlin Wall on November 9th, 1989. Germans brought hammers and chisels to chop away at the wall, the long symbol of the barrier between the East and the West. And in 1990, East Germany and West Germany were reunited once again. So as Eastern Europe was changing, Gorbachev faced opposition from political rivals within the Soviet Union. Some reformers demanded he move quickly to establish a democratic and free enterprise reforms. So again, moving to more of a capitalist type of economy. But hardline communists in the military, secret police resisted these changes and feared the collapse of the Soviet Union. These were individuals that did not want the Soviet Union to become more capitalist. And in August 1991, a group of hardline communists and army generals staged a coup or an overthrow of the government. They arrested Gorbachev and ordered the soldiers to seize the parliament building. Again, a military coup is an overthrow of the government by the military. Keep that in mind. So in response, 50,000 people surrounded the parliament building of the Soviet Union to protect it from soldiers. Boris Yeltsin, a president of the Russian Republic and a reformer, stood on top of a tank and declared, "Democracy will win." President Bush telephoned Yeltsin to express America's support, and on August 22nd, the military coup, the overthrow of the government, collapsed. Freed, Gorbachev returned to Moscow. The defeat of the coup brought a tidal wave of democracy. Soon, all 15 republics had declared their independence, including Ukraine, and Yeltsin outlawed the Communist Party in Russia. On December 25th, 1991, Gorbachev announced the end of the Soviet Union. So the end of the Cold War brought both hope and new challenges to the United States and President George H.W. Bush. While redefining the U.S. foreign policy goals, he faced crises in various parts of the world. One of these was in the Persian Gulf or the Middle East, especially around Kuwait, known as the Persian Gulf War. This was perhaps his most serious crisis in the Middle East. In August 1990, Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein, sent his army into Kuwait, a small neighboring country rich with oil. So he sent his army into Kuwait, which is right here, this little guy. But even though this is a small country, it has a huge amount of oil reserves. Keep that in mind. The U.S. trades with Kuwait. That's where we get our oil from. But in the interest of humanitarian rights, President Bush exercises his power as commander-in-chief to mobilize the troops for war. His power, commander-in-chief, mobilize troops for war, persuaded Congress to declare war in the Persian Gulf area. Bush persuaded other nations to join the coalition to stop Hussein's aggression in the meaning of human rights. Hussein refused to withdraw his troops, and a stage was set for a very small but swift conflict. In January 1991, coalition forces began bombing different parts of Iraq in Operation Desert Storm. Missiles and bombs fell on Iraq, destroying military and civilian sites or locations. 6 weeks later, the coalition sent a short ground war in, where ground troops were sent to free Kuwait and force Iraq to accept a ceasefire. This, again, was over very quickly, and as American troops returned home, the crowds cheered and people were celebrating this victory. But here's something to keep in mind. Although Bush claimed to have intervened in order to protect a small country unable to defend itself and for humanitarian rights, there was one major underlying reason for U.S. involvement in the Persian Gulf War. It had something to do with a natural resource Kuwait had that we held as very valuable. It was oil! That's right. Kuwait, as we said before, is a very small country, but it's very rich in oil, and the United States needs the oil. That is black gold, another name for oil, because it's so valuable to the world, empowering the different machines that we use in our everyday lives. So oil is so important to the United States. So again, was it that the U.S. came in to protect humanitarian aid, or was it to protect our interests in oil and trade with Kuwait? Because as the Iraqi troops retreated, they set these oil wells on fire, which burned for days and days and days, putting this dark black smoke into the air. But before we leave, remember, we claimed humanitarian. We need to get involved to protect different humanitarian, to help these people. But it seems that our real reason was to protect our oil that we would be getting from Kuwait. Interesting to think about. That's all the time we have for today, and we'll see you next time.